TikTok, it's time to rock. I'm really excited. I'm really excited to be here with my co-host to talk about this album. As usual, it's my pleasure to introduce on the top rung this time, all the way from Melbourne, Australia. Feeling a little bit under the weather, ladies and gentlemen, so bear with Brad today. He's going to shoot me for mentioning that, but he did mention that he's struggled to get himself out of bed. He crawled. Took some, no, not Viagra. It wasn't Viagra. No, what is it? No, glucose. It's, something. Baraka.
Let's start the show again.
Took some Baraka to get here with us. So thank you very much, bro.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't have missed it. Just woke up this morning feeling a little bit, nauseous and everything. I had a bit of a rough night's sleep and everything. That's probably why. So, but how is everyone else? How are you, Andrew and Simon?
I'm good. I'm
good. Yeah.
And down there on the top of the world,
the underside. You only know it's the top of the world because that's the way it's drawn.
Oh,
remember, that's history. That's historically, because we're the writers of history. See, we're at the top. See, but it could be the other way around. You see, you could be at the top, Andrew, and we could be at the bottom. Nobody actually knows.
According to Antipodeans, that's exactly how it is.
Just saying, it's all a perspective thing. You're coming in from one thing. There we are, hanging in space. Are we looking at it the right way up, or should we be the other way around? Just asking the questions.
Awesome. Hey, seriously though, guys, before we get into the show, can you guys tell me there in the chat? There's a Nightbot message which has a link to Brad's Facebook group. Is that link on your guys' chat box live? If you click that, will that take you to Brad's Facebook, please? If someone can tick that or click that, I'd be grateful, please, because we're doing some tests on the fly here.
Yep.
Great. Thank you.
That's from the stream. I just clicked on the link and it went straight to Brad's Facebook page.
Awesome, bro.
Simon's awesome.
I'm all about it in me.
Yeah, one of the interesting things about Nightbot, if you guys want to get this up and running for any streaming that you want to do in the future, Nightbot will only allow you to do all this stuff live. So it's one of those interesting things. So bear with us as we get this up and running and get this mini humming like a V8.
100%.
How
are you, Andrew? You good?
I'm good, bro. I'm good. It's always a pleasure to hang out with you guys. It's always a pleasure. I'm wearing my Beatles t-shirt in commemoration for this show. Looking forward to it. Looking forward to the two parts. Yeah. I just want to do a special shout out, guys, to the 5150 show that we did last night with the Rev. That was awesome. Great show. Thank you, people, for watching it. We've got some good hits on there and some good comments. Good to get the Rev back.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm 10/10 of the way through. I don't think I'm right at the end.
It was really good. It was really informative, and Kurt knows a lot already, so he's just instilling a little bit more wisdom that a lot of us mere mortals, need to hear, which is great. So Kurt's the Reverend, so he's got higher powers. He can instill all this information onto us, which is great.
Don't you? Awesome. I just love that. I love that tidbit about the shims underneath the trem arm. Why are we taking those out?
Yeah.
And then you're like really embarrassed to go. Well, my mate Rod Johnson says they're tones. They go, bollocks, is it? Makes me laugh, that is it?
Yeah.
Oh God.
Yeah. That was amazing. So Simon's going to do a quick shout out to everybody in the chat and the chat. And then when he's done that, Brad's going to do a shout out to our Instagram accounts, and then we'll get the show on the road.
Yeah.
Definitely. So anyway, so good morning to Mark Tanner. Morning, Mark. Ready and rolling. And Teresa. Good morning, Teresa. She's already apologising for missing some of the streams. Teresa, we love the fact that you come to some of them, watch them. Fantastic. Ellen as well. Ellen Vorishon. Good morning, Ellen. Hope you're good. Johnny Heartbreaker. Morning, Johnny. That's such a great name, Johnny Heartbreaker. Deja Voodoo as well. Morning, Deja Voodoo. How you doing? So that's who we've got so far. So welcome to you all. Thanks for joining.
Welcome,
I hope you're all good and had a good week.
Yep. And look, everyone in the chat and watching this later on, make sure you subscribe to our channel here. We obviously we're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year. So if you haven't already, I know we say it, we're just saying it again. We're going to keep repeating it. Please share our channel, help us grow. Our Instagram account's there at the bottom on the screen in the bottom. Go and follow us on Instagram. And the more likes and follows we get on there, the more we can grow our accounts, and we can lead you guys straight to the source instead of astray. So yeah, go there and follow us on Instagram, and that'd be much appreciated. I just wanted to do a bit of a shout out to one of my main inspirations and one of my heroes as a young kid growing up, Mr. James Douglas Morrison, Jim Morrison. 50 years since he passed yesterday, where I am here in Australia. So, yeah, 50 years. Long live Jim Morrison, the Lizard King.
Yeah.
He can do anything.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I love the Doors. Love the Doors.
Yeah. We should do a Doors. I don't know. If anyone's watching this and they want us to do Doors episode, we'll do it, even though it's not British Electric Blues, but it all goes back to the blues at some point. So,
Jimmy Morrison loved the blues, bro. He loved the blues. So there's a connection there. I loved the Doors too. In my sixth form year, especially, I was just consumed by Jim Morrison. Alive She Cried had just come out.
Yep.
That great album, and then I remember buying the live albums, 521, baby, 1 and 5, and I'm going, what is this? What?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. Look, I'm a pretty proud Doors nut. I actually sung in a Doors tribute band.
Hey,
so,
leather trousers, giving it.
Yeah, so, had all the belt and everything. Maybe one day.
He had the David Lee Roth versions on too.
Oh.
No,
you had to go and ruin it, didn't you?
Actually, it would be, in the words of Jim Morrison, be great to get together one more time with that band. It was fun. It was great.
Yeah. I'll bet. Yeah, Doors stuff's great to do. Yeah.
Yes, I did. Johnny Heartbreaker. Val Kilmer did a brilliant job. Val Kilmer was amazing in that Doors movie.
Yep. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about that Doors movie as being fairly, glorified and not 100% true and whatnot. But in saying that, you have to understand that it is a movie and they needed to make a plot, so they just embellished a few things which weren't necessarily the truth, which upset the remaining Doors members. But anyway, we're not here to talk about the Doors. We're here to talk about the Beatles today.
Another great 60s band.
That's a good thing, maybe just before we segue back to the Beatles. If anyone here wants to, wants us to do a Doors episode in the future, give us a comment, let us know. I'd love to do the first record. That would be amazing. The Doors' first record.
Yeah.
You know,
I'll do anyone you like.
But yeah, let's see what people in the chat say. So, shall we dive into the album? Do you want to talk about anything else before we get into it?
No, bro.
No.
I might be a little bit rude though, and I might flick up some graphics during the course of your intro quickly if I think it's relevant to what you guys are talking about.
Yep.
And then
no problem.
Some stage we'll go through them, and we'll have some more graphics obviously for next week. And I'm spinning. Okay, so just carry on, bro.
Yeah. So I mean, look, I'm going to ask you guys the same thing, but I'm going to explain to you what Revolver means to me for an album for the Beatles. Like I became a Beatles nut, and I loved the Beatles. I loved John Lennon. At the particular time when I got into the Beatles was my favorite, and this record in particular, is a long way off. Please Please Me and with the Beatles. If you listen to the songwriting, they evolved so much in a 3-year period. So this was like the transition period for me for the Beatles. So when I actually listened to this record, I could clearly hear the John Lennon songs. I could clearly hear the Paul McCartney songs, and I could clearly hear the George Harrison songs on the record, and obviously the Ringo Starr one as well. But what I'm getting at is you could hear they had evolved from being a club band performing live through Hamburg. They were an amazing live little act. Their first couple of records were based around obviously playing live and performing and harmonies and songs. And if you go back to the history of the Beatles, you know that they started in Hamburg in Germany, and they were touring and playing, performing 2 and 3 gigs a day. So they became a great little rocking band. But this is where they evolved. This is the Rubber Soul Revolver era is where they actually started to become and segue into more songwriters, if that makes sense. So not discounting what they did before that, but this is where they became a little bit more. Let's say they started delving into other areas of songwriting rather than just playing "I Want to Hold Your Hand" and "Please Please Me" and songs like with those sort of melodies, which were fantastic. I'm not knocking them, but this is where the band started to really come of age for me. On Rubber Soul and Revolver are the 2 segues into probably one of the greatest albums of all time, which is Sgt. Pepper's. But for me, I've always loved. It started off. I'd only ever really listen to the John Lennon songs on this record, and I sort of used to sometimes shy away from the McCartney songs on it. But over the years, obviously, we talk about records when we go on these programs, when we do the show, from start to finish. So when you listen to this album from start to finish, it's like a journey. There's some more melodic-y sort of stuff. There's some tangents of like Indian music in there. Obviously, we'll go a lot more into that when we go into the songs, I'm sure. But it is a journey, this album, and it's a very strong record. It's one of the Beatles' strongest records, in my opinion, and that's why I picked it. So, Simon and Andrew, I don't know who wants to go first, but what does this album mean to you?
Well, how was that? I was 8 years old in 1966, so I don't particularly remember it being we had some Beatles albums in my house. We had Help, Hard Day's Night, and Rubber Soul. And we also had Sgt. Pepper's, but I don't remember this one being around so much. So, clearly I would have known the singles off it, but because they would have been chart hits, and I would have been watching Top of the Pops, checking them out. But necessarily have known just slightly lesser known tracks until later, when I, pick it up later in the early 70s when I was started buying albums and had some of the Beatles albums and kind of filled in the gaps in many ways. So something that I came to a bit later. I mean, I think the brilliant thing about the Beatles, one of many brilliant things about the Beatles, is that you can see the progression, can't you? If you go back to Please Please Me, and then with the Beatles, Hard Day's Night, and Help, everyone is a progression. Everyone is more sophisticated, and they're changing. And you arrive at Rubber Soul, and clearly there's a big kind of big change there. I think meeting Dylan, smoking marijuana, getting turned onto that is absolutely, I think Rubber Soul is really a pivotal point in this. And Revolver carries on that creative flowering into different areas, understanding that nothing is off limits to what you want to do. You need to go and explore. I think it ties in, very much with that. So, for me, it's an explosion of their real talent of songwriting and exploring sounds, ideas, as you say, Brad, in a way that sort of Help is a slightly different thing, but to that. But the progression, I think, is astonishing. When you look at their career, 13 albums in 7 years, that's output, It made me laugh yesterday when you were talking about Wolfgang Van Halen. He's obviously clearly had an album ready for 5 years. And I was laughing to myself, thinking, you wouldn't get away with that in the 60s, would you? You'd have had that one. And by the way, we'll have the other one out in September, kind of thing. It's kind of belting along. So it's, for me, one of the pivotal. I mean, they're all pivotal. I say this on this channel quite a lot. I think that the Beatles are underrated. I think what they did is underrated. I think their influence is still underrated. Across the universe, to coin a phrase. I think this, it's an astonishing achievement, and my relation to this album is in relation to their career and what they did as a whole, really. And looking at that as a whole, it's a fantastic. I love all their records. I don't think there's no duds. There's no, really at all to me. There's different things, but there's no duds.
It's funny you mentioned that. There's a soft spot for each of their albums in my heart. That's for different reasons. So Andrew, what is it? Just quickly, what does it mean to you? And we'll dive into it.
Oh, I think this is the definitive album. I know we've done Abbey Road, and Abbey Road is the late album for me. This is the middle album, and For Sale, Beatles for Sale, is the early album. Those three albums, in my opinion, are it. But this is the album. Everyone talks about Sgt. Pepper's. I think this is hands up. 100% better for me, in my opinion, than Sgt. Pepper's. I think everything that the Beatles did in 1966 was fantastic. It was the last year that they toured. It was the only year that they did one album. This album, as Simon and you said, was a pivotal album for the Beatles because it was the first album where the Beatles didn't collaborate on the songs. So Brad's discussion about John sounding like John Lennon and Paul McCartney sounding like Paul McCartney and George, it's because they were writing these songs individually in a band context, of course, but certainly from a songwriter's perspective. So I love it because of that, because they brought that different perspective to the band. I love this album because they did some studio trickery that we might get a chance to talk about today, but certainly in the context of ranking the tracks next week, because some of the songs do have some awesome, wicked studio trickery. And also, having said that, they still played some rock and roll. It was a rock and roll album. And one other thing too, guys, are we going to talk about the 2 singles for the album next week, Rain and Paperback Writer? Right, sorry,
Yeah.
Rain. Yeah, because they were the 2 singles that were released in conjunction with the album. So I think we should talk about those songs. So they'll give us a week to at least evaluate those 2 singles. But this is the defining album, in my opinion, for the Beatles. If I had to have one album, this would be it.
Yeah, it's that's you highlighted a lot of good points there, Andrew, and clearly they did write individually. There was input from the band members with the song, but they respectfully let the songwriter have their song the way they wanted it instead of interfering, which is really quite it was a bit of a change for them, because they always collaborated like 100% as a band, even though it was Lennon and McCartney were the songwriters. You know, they always collaborated, whether it was George involved and Ringo as well. So it was always a performance thing. So as we get into the record, I mean, I'll discuss it, but you know, this was the first record that they actually did where they go into the studio with an idea, and they bootstrap it. They'd work the idea out from the ground up in the studio, where majority of the time they were always sort of they were well rehearsed and ready to go. So that was the unique change in this record for me. You could really tell that they focused on that. So getting into the album now, Revolver is like the 7th studio album by the Beatles. It was released on the 5th of August 1966. It was accompanied by the double A-side single Eleanor Rigby and Yellow Submarine. It was recorded between the 6th of April and the 21st of June 1966, produced by George Martin. But the Beatles themselves they didn't credit themselves as producers on this record, but they were oversight. Obviously George Martin was the producer, but as I get into it, I'll explain pretty much my take on it. They were producers as well, heavily involved in the production of the album. So after releasing their previous album, Rubber Soul, they took off on what would be their last UK concert tour. They took a lengthy break, and then they returned to Abbey Road to record for 3 months straight. They just recorded for 3 months straight and focused on recording this album. This is the first recordings released for the sessions, were engineered by Jeff Emmerich. It was Paperback Writer and Rain. So those 2 songs were the first 2 that were worked on for the sessions. Having longer in the studio allowed them, like, obviously more creativity and experimentation. And John and Paul are in fine form on this record, and George also makes his mark with 3 songs on this album. So this is the first time George was allowed 3 songs on an album, which was, previously it was always 2, I think, wasn't it, guys? I think 2 at that point. They always gave him 2, 1 per side. So they gave him 2 songs on this, and they're fantastic songs as well. And we'll get into that as we're moving forward. The album obviously entered the UK charts at number 1, where it stayed for 7 weeks. And obviously it was in the charts for 34 weeks, this album was. So that's pretty remarkable. The Beatles, this album was the final recording project before their retirement from performing live. This is obviously when they embraced studio technology. They really focused on creating songs in the studio with what the studio had to offer, as opposed to recording live and just putting overdubs on. So because they had no plans to perform live anymore, and they'd retired from obviously performing live, they embraced the new recording techniques like automatic double tracking, vari-speed, reverse tapes, close audio miking, an assortment of exotic instruments, isolated vocal recordings, the use of headphones instead of monitors while they were tracking vocals to eliminate bleed into the actual vocal tracks. And they did this knowing full well that they never have to produce these songs live. So that's a really big point to this record. they focused heavily on writing songs, creating songs, recording songs, with the envision that they didn't have to perform them live. Because obviously, with a lot of the studio trickery and the way the songs are written, there's no way they could have pulled these off live. And that was that they knew that was their focus, was to just focus on the song. This is definitely the start of the psychedelic period for the band for me. It's quite evident when listening to the songs. You can hear their interest in like drug use, like LSD, Eastern philosophy and avant-garde. They address their themes like death and transcendence from material concerns, which we'll get into in a minute. It has since been regarded one of the greatest and most innovative albums in the history of popular music, and it's so diverse with its musical styles and lyrical content. So, you know, I think we mentioned on the last show when we'll go through this, Andrew mentioned that, you know, that it's a big step away from Love, Love Me Do, this record. I mean, they're singing about, when we get to songs like Tomorrow Never Knows, there's nothing to do with Love, Love Me Do on this record, if that makes sense. There are tracks that are written about love as well, but what I'm saying is they stepped a fair way away from that, and a lot of that had to do with their you know, influence with LSD and things like that, and obviously smoking pot and their influences around them. You mentioned Dylan on Rubber Soul there, Simon, and same thing, like those influences were bleeding into their
Dylan bloke.
Yeah, they're bleeding into their music. Just let me see where I'm up to here. Key production techniques that we used. They used a technique called ADT, which was called automatic double tracking. EMI technical engineer Ken Townsend invented that. He said he invented it on the 6th of April. It's a technique that's used when you link two tape recorders automatically to create a vocal track. The normal way to double track a vocal is to sing it and then sing it again on a separate track and try and sing it the same way as close as you can to get that sort of chorusy effect. And there was a particular instance where, what's his name? Ken Townsend was driving home from a session that he just completed with John Lennon trying to double track some vocals. And it was taking forever and they weren't getting it right. And he said, there's got to be an easier way to doing this. So he came up with this idea to do this in this particular way. So obviously coming back into the studio and trying that, was that what you were going to show there, Andrew, or was that the compressor?
That was the compressor, bro. Okay. So
Sorry.
Carry on talking. Sorry, brother.
Yeah. Sorry, no, it's okay. I just sort of flick up and I was like, what was that? So obviously the guys in the Beatles are really happy with this invention because it meant less effort. They could double track their vocal the way that I described. So this became this was an invention that was used everywhere after this, and it's used all over Revolver. It soon became a standard in pop culture technique, and it led to what we call like a chorus effect or a natural chorus effect. So it was quite innovative for the time. And this record, as I get more into depth here, I promise I won't bore you too much with too much technical stuff here, but I find this stuff so interesting. It's like what I call, you know, it's like music porn for me. It's like I love it, you know. I can't get enough of it.
You need to talk about that because the show that we did yesterday with the Rev indicated and proved that this is the kind of stuff that the people watch our channels for. So don't make any apologies. Just do what you got to do, guys.
Yeah. So obviously this, like I keep saying, this was the most experimental work the band had done at this point. Their first song that they attempted was Tomorrow Never Knows. And if we all listen to that, I'm sure we all have now. The three of us have listened to this all week, and I can say that when I listen to this, I'm still hearing something new in there every time. I don't know about you guys, but when I listen to Tomorrow Never Knows, which is, you know, I'm not going to sort of give away too much, but it's one of my favorites on the album, and I'm hearing something new in there all the time. And I've listened to this song for 30 years or something. I'm still hearing something new in there every time. So Lennon sung his vocal through twin revolving speakers inside a Leslie cabinet, which Leslie cabinet's designed for a Hammond organ. So when you hear a Hammond organ and there's an expression pedal on a Hammond organ, it speeds up and slows down the speaker, so it gives you that wobbly effect, right? So this was the first time that anyone had sung through a Leslie cabinet. And basically it said, like, one of the things that I've got here, Lennon was quite predominantly vocal about how innovative they were on this record, and they did things before guys like Hendrix and everything that took, credit for backmasking and all sorts of stuff. And these guys did it first.
What's backmasking?
Well, I'm getting to that.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, I'm going to get to that. Okay, so Tomorrow Never Knows marked the first time the vocals were recorded through a microphone into the input of a Leslie speaker. The majority of the backing tracks for the song consist of a series of tape loops, which were the idea of Paul McCartney. So McCartney's influence in this song is pivotal. The Beatles each prepared loops at home. They all had a section to record. They recorded sounds on loops, and then they added this as a musical backing to Tomorrow Never Knows. Now, musically, Tomorrow Never Knows, which I'm going to get more into when we do the tracks themselves, but it's basically a drone on one chord. It's C all the way through. So you can sit and just strum a C chord on an acoustic and sing this song, and you don't have to change the chord. That's what I'm getting at. Obviously, there's melodies going on and all sorts of stuff going on with the loops and that. So the majority of this backing track is like tape loops, which was never done before. And I'm just going to read something out here that I thought is really imperative to read. And I wish there was pictures of this stuff, and maybe Andrew's found some, I don't know. The Beatles each prepared loops at their home. And then basically what they did, the process was carried out with live multiple tape recordings running simultaneously. And some of the longer loops extended out of the control room down into the corridor. So basically this long tape of a loop is going.
And here is the key implement in that tape loops. They put around pencils.
Oh, right. Okay, there you go.
Yeah. Well, you do that with it, see. But yeah, it's a physical thing. You take the tape and you then move the pen, and it goes around the pen. You get a longer or shorter loop.
Well, there you go. Also, you learn something new every day. I mean, but basically, this is where the reverse tape or backmasking, what I call backmasking, the reverse tape sounds used on Rain, which is specifically like on Lennon's vocals. There's some tape loops and overdubs, obviously, on Tomorrow Never Knows. The backwards or backmask guitar solo on I'm Only Sleeping. No one had ever heard that stuff before. This was done before Hendrix. Hendrix was influenced from the Beatles heavily, and he always said that. He said, like, when he was at Isle of Wight concert, when he's walking to the stage, they go, "What's your favourite band?" He goes, "The Beatles." It was very predominantly influenced by the Beatles. So if you listen to backmasking, I'm just going to read this one part out here that I found. It said, Harrison deliberately composed and recorded his guitar parts with a view of how the notes would sound when the tape was reversed or corrected. So I'll give you an example. What you're hearing at the first part of the song in the solo, where it's backmasked, is the last thing he's played. Does that make sense? So
yeah.
He's orchestrated a little guitar solo. So the first note you're hearing in that solo is the last thing he played. They've just basically reversed the tape. So you're hearing
literally.
So I did this on my EP, and I'm not doing self-promotion here, but my song Dance on Fire, the guitar solo is completely backmasked. I did exactly the same thing as what the Beatles did, but I've got the technology to do it without tapes. Okay? So I recorded, and I basically what I'm saying is Harrison deliberately composed that solo in, what was it, I'm Only Sleeping, to start on that particular note and end on it. So what I did, same thing. I had to I had to work out where I wanted the song to end and how I wanted to start it, and in between the inflections, I wanted it to. So I had to do it. It's like programming your brain backwards. So it's quite unique. It's a technique that, say, Hendrix embraced and did amazingly all through his career. I know I'm going on about it. I won't go on about too much more, but that's a cool picture, Andrew. That's a really cool picture. Is that out of your reference points, Andrew, or offline?
It's just offline. That's apparently Jeff's machine. So sorry to interrupt you, bro. I know that you've got a train of thought going, but I just wanted to throw that in there. And I got something else too that I think might be interesting. That I think so the artificial double tracking was invented by Ken Townsend during a Cilla Black session. So it allowed the existing lead vocal track to be duplicated out of phase, but with pitch by a variable of 24 to 30 milliseconds on the second tape machine during the mixing. So, I just want to back up what you said there. This stuff that we take for granted today that we can do on our computers, back then, Simon and Brad, a guy had to build. It's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that in right now, Andrew, because the next thing I've got here is the band's interest in tones was resulting from varying tape speed or vary speed, extending to recording a basic track to a faster tempo than intending the song to sound on disc. So I'm really glad you brought that up because it's perfect timing. Perfect timing. They used a Fairchild 670 compressor. It's Fairchild's mono equivalent. The 660 was used extensively during the Revolver sessions and contributed to the robust sounds captured on the album. That's one thing I was going to say on this album, that the instrument sounds are fantastic for this era. It's like they evolved. By the time they got to this record, the bass sounded great. The drums were phenomenal. Guitars was sensational. Like everything on the records, the vocal tone is amazing. So they really focused on that studio, what I call artistry. You work in the studio, you pull the best out of the studio you can. That's what I'm saying here is I think what they tried to do with McCartney's bass is they put his bass amplifier via a loudspeaker. And
correct.
It's been configured to serve as a microphone in order to give the bass a more prominence on other Beatles than on previous Beatles songs. The technique apparently was only used on a couple of songs, but they worked on an enhanced bass sound throughout much of this album. Obviously, with Ringo's drum sounds, they put like cloth and padding inside his drums to actually dampen the sound. So, because in the old days of the old Ludwig kids, they were very resonancy and they were great live kids, but sometimes they weren't the greatest recording kids. I mean, John Bonham can argue that that's not the fact, but in these days they were limited with recording techniques. So they actually dampened his drums, and then they moved the microphones, which is completely opposite to, say, Bonham, 3 inches away from the drum heads, and they compress a signal through that Fairchild limiter to get the big sound. So obviously there's different techniques to get great drum tones. And I found that really interesting because I really love Ringo's drum sound on this record. On Tomorrow Never Knows, it's fantastic. That's the backbone of that song for me. It's phenomenal.
And I'm really, really glad that you mentioned the bass and the drum sound, because that's the defining starting point for this album. And I just want to echo just a little bit about what you said there. You know, Paul McCartney loved the Motown bass sound and wanted to get that. And it was critical for him because he's listening to these contemporary guys, James Jamison, playing the hook on a precision bass, and he's going, how can I get this? But one other key thing too to the speaker system that you mentioned too, bro, is he had to ditch that beloved Hofner and play this.
Yep.
He had to play
the
that
Ricky.
Rickenbacker.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, that's a great photo, Andrew. That's great.
Yeah. Just going back to the drum sound. Apparently, the integral part of that drum sound was the 4-necked sweater that they'd worn in. I think it's Help, isn't there? Or an early picture of it. Apparently, Jeff Emerick took that sweater and jammed it in the bass drum, and he moved the bass drum mic much closer to the drum than it had been done before to get it. Yeah, but to deaden it off, he put this 4-neck sweater into Ringo's bass drum.
That's amazing.
It's lovely.
So on songs like Eleanor Rigby, for example, there's string sections on there, and Paul McCartney was really adamant about the fact he wanted close mics on all the instruments and the horns and everything to get a real biting sound. And obviously, classically trained musicians are like, "What are you doing? This is like against the rules." So that was innovative in its. Basically, they called it groundbreaking. It caused alarm with them. Basically, they weren't happy about it, but obviously they're getting paid to do what they do, and they did that. So if you listen to Eleanor Rigby, those string sections are really in your face, and the brass is in there. It's like, it's like amazing.
Apparently, Paul McCartney, who's one of the greatest musicians ever at the height of his success, the orchestra players. Guys weren't concerned about listening to Paul McCartney. It was only because of George Martin.
Yeah.
That okay, we'll do what George Martin says then.
Exactly.
This guy, this hippie over here.
Yeah, this long-haired lout. I'm not going to listen to this rat bag.
Well, it's all
Good
part
point.
of that. It's all part of that cultural divide, and those guys. My dad would have used some of those guys on sessions in the '60s for things that he did. Yeah, and absolutely that kind of disdain for pop music was rife in those guys.
They were still wearing white coats, weren't they?
Yeah, I think they were like lab rats. They were like lab rats in the studio. So this became a collaborative effort in production. This is probably the first time the Beatles were really hands-on with their. And the best way to put it is that George Martin, their longtime producer, his role shifted a little bit. He was more helping them achieve what they were going after as a collaborator, more so than the producer. So, he was always called the fifth Beatle, George Martin, and they really relied on George Martin to capture their ideas. That was something that I thought was important to bring up here, because George Martin, as you know, the producer, was quite pivotal for the Beatles from the early days onwards. Obviously, it was the first time the Beatles had integrated studio technology into conception of the recordings they made, as opposed to playing and performing the songs live. So again, they were focused on creating landscapes and paintings, like sound paintings, as opposed to actually trying to perform live. So as we all know, the Beatles were a fantastic live group, but they wanted to really create landscapes and soundscapes and artistic things in songs rather than being just a performance. And apparently EMI Studio, which is Abbey Road, apparently their 4-track tape machines were placed in the studio control room alongside the producer and the engineer, rather than in a dedicated room, because they were doing a lot more stuff with the tapes and the machines as well to help the Beatles capture the sounds they were doing. I'm just looking here through my notes. I've got a little bit sidetracked, guys. Hang on. So, Jeff Emerick recalled, obviously, that there was no pre-production or rehearsals for this album. And this is something I thought was important. I brought up a bit earlier, but the band actually used the studio to create the songs. So John Lennon would come in for a song, for example. He'd come in with the song idea, and they worked together to finish the song that John had written, as opposed to rehearsing it up, collaborating, songwriting together. It was like that's how they worked on this album for the first time. Obviously, later, moving forward, they embraced that a lot more. Where are we? They were actually going to make this album like a continuous flow as well. They were going to make it like, the medley in Abbey Road. They were going to just make it like continuous without a break in it. And obviously they opted not to do that. They were in there willing to experiment and give everything a go. They just wanted to capture the sounds that were in their head. Obviously, everything they were going through, taking LSD, hallucinogenic drugs, and it really enhanced what we're hearing on the record. The use of the compression and the tonal equalization. The Beatles encouraged the studio staff to break from standard recording practices. That's, in a roundabout way, what they were saying is, we want to make the guitar sound different. We want to make the piano sound different. We want to make the drums sound different. We want something different to what you would normally do. And so they pushed the limits of studio technology at that time. We have to remember this was 1966, guys. So the studios were fairly basic compared to technology today. So what they achieved on this record, a lot of people even have struggled to achieve this sort of dynamics and color with Pro Tools, which you can do pretty much anything with plugins, yeah? So very, very, very ahead of their time. Like, I can't really think of an album in 1966 that has this variation of tone, color, songwriting. Like, everything was, for me, I'm talking personally, I think this was a very pivotal record for even their influences, like the bands that were influenced by them, the Stones, even Dylan was influenced by the Beatles. Like, everyone was influenced by them. And this was one of the albums that really changed people's songwriting from this point on. Everyone was like, oh, let's freak out, let's write some trippy stuff. David Bowie, he used to say Lennon was one of his biggest inspirations, So even Bowie in this period, his songwriting changed around this point. So I just want to touch on some instruments here, Andrew. I've sort of covered everything I wanted to cover. If you guys want to talk about anything else, have I missed anything that you guys want to talk about before we get to instruments? Or is there anything you guys can think of that you want to talk about? I know you've got to talk about the album cover and things like that, Simon, but while I'm on a flow, I might finish if that's okay.
No, that's fine. I've got a few things to talk about. Andrew, do
you want me to throw up some of the picks that I got now? Is that a good opportunity?
Yeah. Well,
okay, right.
And I'll talk, or do you want to just throw the pictures up? We'll talk about the pictures.
We'll see what the pictures are, because Andrew's got a bit of a surprise for us. So, yeah. We'll see what he's got.
So are you still talking about the instruments, or is Simon talking about?
So I was going to touch on the instruments and what they used and a couple of techniques, but let's if you want to show some photos, it might break it up a bit. And everyone loves seeing the pictures, mate. So it's great.
No, I got some ideas about some comments about what Brad's been talking about, which is really cool. Yeah.
So that's
it's to us.
Mr. George Harrison playing the SG, the Gibson SG. That was his preferred instrument on this record. So you can really hear that SG tone on a lot of the songs. I encourage everyone to go and try and pick them out. And we'll talk about them, obviously, with the track rankings. But, if you can have a good listen in there. But that's a great photo. And, that's in Abbey Road. And you can see Mick Jagger there in the background. So Mick Jagger obviously paid a visit to the studio. It's a great picture, that one.
Hello, Crappy Luxury. Welcome.
Yeah. Great picture, that one. And you can see the console there, and they're all sitting around. They're obviously listening back to something. Probably.
Yeah, okay. So these are pics from the Top of the Pops gig, which is pivotal around that time of the album. So, you know, you can see here that they've got their casino guitars. Ringo's still playing his standard Ludwig drum kit there.
Yep.
Again, you can see them there with their casinos, and those guitars are pivotal to this album. We can talk about that a little bit more as we go through. What else have we got here? I'm just going to throw up a few more cool photos here just to help break up. Yeah. So this is a photo from the sessions for the cover and the back cover.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's one key guitar that all the guys had. So, you know, John Lennon's got one. This is from '66 from the tour in America. George is playing one. He's got a tremolo though on his, hasn't he? He's got a Bixby.
Yep.
And there's Paul McCartney playing his left-handed.
Yep. So he's obviously got it strung upside down, I'd say. Is he?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. So that was a big part of their sound.
And one of the key things too that I think that's really pivotal about the Beatles during this period, so they're still dressing, you know, similar. They're a little bit individualistic, but you know they're looking incredibly cool, aren't they? You know,
Well, that whole era of the mop tops and everything, they were sort of outgrowing that a little bit, you know.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's a bit the fashion is a bit of a crossroads, isn't it? It's still kind of straight jeans, straight leg trousers, and as you can see, kind of jackets and shirts. But it's starting to get twisted. You know, you've got the sunglasses, the longer hair. So it's kind of, you know, you can see it being twisted, but it's not the flair.
Yep.
We've lost Simon.
Isn't it interesting? You see, like back in that previous picture, you can stay where you are, but the previous picture, all of them are wearing round sunnies, and John Lennon's wearing square type sunnies, where later Lennon was known for his round glasses.
Yeah. What's really cool too about that the '66 period too, guys, is you know the Live at the Budokan, which is an essential DVD. A lot of the clips are on YouTube. You can hear them play. None of the songs from this album though are on that '66 tour list, which is interesting.
Yep.
Some more pics there from again with their casinos.
Yeah. And those casinos were a big part of their tone, weren't they, Andrew? Like on this record, you can hear them quite. And you've had a few casinos, haven't you, Andrew?
One of the reasons why they liked the casinos, there's a couple of reasons. They liked them because they were light, and when you're touring, that's really important because, you know, they had themselves and one guy, Mal, as their roadie. And that was it. So, you know, carrying these guitars as far as any other guitar that they had was a burden, not as heavy as they would have had. If, for example, a Country Gentleman, a Gretsch is twice, 3 times the weight. But also, because they're completely hollowed, they love that mid-tone punch that you could get through. So what we got to remember, guys, in the mid-1960s, when you had a lot of the guitars that they were playing through these Vox and Fender amps, they were quite tinny. They were quite sharp, icy. It was an icy tone. They didn't have a lot of overdrive pedals that we take for granted today. And one of the great things about the casinos is that they could basically play through their amp, fiddle with their tone and volume, and then get that deep resonant sound that they were searching for. Another good thing about the casinos too is that the P90 pickups are set at a set height, so you can't adjust them. So they're really good for a guy that like George Harrison and John Lennon, who were doing their own setups, really good, really easy to set up, whip the strings off, whip them on, and away you went. But what's really interesting about that, though, is that they weren't changing their strings every night, like a lot of the artists do today, where they've got guitar techs and they change their strings all the time. John Lennon apparently was noted for having a horrible fretboard. It was gunky. It was horrible. No one liked picking up his Casino because it was dirty. So, and
it's one way of stopping people, isn't it?
But the interesting thing, though, guys, with the Casino, because you've got that hollow body mid punch, you're putting fresh strings on probably doesn't work as well as having dead strings. So yeah, just one of those key little things. But it was an invention that the Beatles found themselves. Cheap guitars. Casinos were cheap. They were intermediate guitars, and they were the best band in the world who could afford gold-plated guitars. But they just had cheap guitars because they sounded good.
Yeah. Well, it's
better than the British ones. I mean, I think that's the point, isn't it? That in many ways they're better guitars than the British stuff they were using previous to that.
Yeah.
Different sounds and things. So it is a progression, isn't it? I mean, remember Epiphone were with their own company back in the 60s. They'd been bought by Gibson.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is the first era that the band had incorporated other musical instruments like Indian instruments like tambours, tablas, clavichords, vorophones, and tack pianos into the work. Obviously, the guitar sound on the album was more robust than before. They were using Fender amplifiers. They used some hybrid type Vox amps as well. Is that right, Andrew? Yep.
And so what we'll do is we'll flick those up next week when we're talking about the songs, especially, so just to keep the instruments in perspective. But absolutely. They were using Vox amps and Fender amps, which is, an interesting amalgamation of amps, but very defining as far as the Beatles were concerned. We've discussed this before, haven't we, guys? The Rolling Stones were playing Fender amps 2 years before the Beatles, and the Beatles were using Vox amps, and they weren't happy with the tone that they were getting with these Vox amps. They were hearing these other artists live and going, why can't we sound like that? But they were into that commercial deal, so they had to play these Voxes or these American versions, these Super Beatles, which were basically transistor amps, solid state amps. And George Harrison in particular was hearing Eric Clapton and all these other guys getting these great tones, and he's going, what can I do? And so, as Brad said, his first move was to get an SG.
Yeah. So that became his preferred instrument on this record. And they used the Fairchild 660 limiters with a recording process. I think I pretty much covered everything I wanted to cover, but they included horns, string sections, sound effects that weren't necessarily used before, backmasking or reverse the tape, looping with, as we mentioned before with Tomorrow Never Knows, which we'll go into in depth next week, guys. But that's pretty much all I really wanted to cover off.
Awesome. Before you give your contribution, Simon, do you want to do a quick shout out to the people that have jumped into the chat while Brad was giving that awesome introduction?
Thanks.
Yeah. So good morning to Greg Vanzini. Nice to see you, Greg Vanzini. Hope you're good. Hobo Roadie as well. And Mark Tanner, Crappy Luxury as well. Welcome, Crappy Luxury. I've not really seen your name before. And I had somebody else as well. Amal as well. I think that's called Amal. I don't know. We'll have to comment. So Vintage Sounds. Welcome, Vintage Sounds. And
awesome. Been a long time since we've seen Vintage Sounds.
Yeah. He's already had a message deleted by Nightbot.
Guys.
Fierce.
your emojis, just if you only please put 2 emojis. If you put more than 2 emojis, Nightbot puts you in timeout. So that's not me, Simon, Brad, or any of our moderators. It's Nightbot, and I can't fix it yet. Fruitcake Tony.
Yeah. Oh, it's Fruitcake Tony. Yes, Fruitcake Tony. Hey, how you doing? Great stuff last night, Fruitcake Tony. Really enjoyed it. I'm 10/10 of the way through. I think I've got 5 minutes to go. And John, ZD351. Hey. I did not say that, John. Very dare you. Yes. Even Teresa's has a message deleted by Nightbot. So Nightbot is clearly having the time of its life in there.
Yeah, I'll go through and have a look and see if I can get rid of that command when we're back talking. But I don't know.
Johnny Bean. It's a Johnny Bean raid. Get the siren out.
Yeah, I don't know where Brad is, but when he comes back, we'll just reiterate with him that his introduction was fantastic. But I get the strong emphasis on what Brad was saying, Simon, about how the Beatles certainly saw the studio not as a place where they record, but certainly as an instrument. The studio was finally becoming an instrument in itself.
I think that's right. I mean, I was going to make the terrible point that I think that for me, the album that kind of led the way was Pet Sounds. Pet Sounds showed the Beatles what the studio could do, what you could do. Because I mean, you'll know that by 66, Brian Wilson had sort of really stopped touring, and he was really the man in the studio, and he was the guy who went into those massive productions. I think Good Vibrations is 1966, so it's come out in 1966, and that it's a kind of 3-minute epic, isn't it? It's got so much in it in a 3-minute song that some bands would have given a whole album to crammed it all into 3 minutes. And so I think that, and I know that that it's a sort of friendly competition, and I know that Paul McCartney particularly heard Pet Sounds, was like, blimey, stepping it up. So I think that Brian Wilson, setting the pace in the studio for using the studio like that as an instrument. But I think you're right. I think the other thing clearly is that I'd say they got home studios, didn't they? So they started doing things at home because they weren't touring. They started to do stuff at home, and they were able to, produce ideas and bring ideas to the studio. Clearly, they all had tape recorders at home and things like that, which it's more difficult to do in 1965 when you're on tour, roaming the globe, playing here, there, and everywhere. And let's not forget, they worked. 2 albums a year, plus tours, plus singles. That's the work rate of not only them. I mean, the Beatles, but those bands in the early mid-60s was amazing. That I seen a Yardbirds. They played about 300 gigs in 1965, I think. And sometimes they played 2 gigs a day to do that. But so the idea, and I think that it is interesting that 1966 is where they stop, and they, because they can stop, they think about creativity in a different way, and that's led by lots of things. I think one of the key things for me that was that this is the first album with Jeff Emerick as the engineer, not Norman Smith. And Jeff Emerick is 21. Norman Smith was there's 22 years between them. So Norman Smith is old, and Jeff Emerick was much more prepared to push the limits and have a go at things. I think that maybe Norman Smith was a bit more dyed-in-the-wool EMI guy. Great producer, did some fantastic work, with the Beatles, Pink Floyd, and others. But I think there's definitely a difference here in using Jeff Emerick instead of Norman Smith to push the creativity forward, and that wanting to investigate sounds that fitted with Jeff because he was 21 years old. 21 years old. So I think that's a big thing to do with their progress into And yes. So those are the kind of things. Oh, just one more thing. That thing you were talking about, having the tape machines in the room, rather than down the corridor, which is what they used to do down the corridor. And it's the classic. Do you know the classic quote? Is it rolling, Bob? If Bob Dylan is recording "To Be Alone with You." Well, that's because they're asking the tape operator, and there's somebody. Bob Johnson is in the control room. There's somebody in the corridor, and then there's somebody in the tape room, and they're relaying this message down to the guy in the tape room to turn it on. So that's when he says, "Is it rolling, Bob?" He's asking down the corridor to the tape operator, "Have you pressed the record button?" which is that thing about not having them in the same room as you, which now is kind of completely the norm, isn't it? You have tape machines, in the 70s, certainly you had tape machines in the room, not somewhere else. It's funny that they put them somewhere else. Anyway, yes. So fantastic intro and massive amounts of detail. Really good.
Yeah, I tried. I had information there. I just wanted to make it fairly flowy and relevant. So, yeah. I normally, guys, I'll let everyone know in the chat, I spent an hour or two on a Sunday just re-going over everything I've done and just reassessing it. Today I didn't really get the chance. So hopefully that I got a nice flow there for you all. So,
mate, it's outstanding. And I know what it's like when you sort of got to fly solo and wing and go for it yourself. We all do, but, it's fantastic. The information, I think you've culled everything that's critical to this album. Yeah. But specifically, though, when we get into the songs next week, we'll make sure that we've got just a little bit of information there and some picks to throw up with these instruments in relationship to the songs, because the comments that we get on the after shows, guys, and we all go back and watch them from people, they want to see that stuff. So we're just delivering what you guys are asking for. So thank you. Can you guys in the chat,
there is no bottom to this, is there?
do shitloads of emojis, because I think I've deleted that command. So give us like 50 thumbs up, and then you shouldn't be in time out now. Sorry, Simon.
Is it different if you're a mod and if you're not a moderator?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, mods can get away with a lot. It's the rockers that can't.
Mods and rockers.
Are you a mod or a rocker? I'm a mocker.
And I haven't been looking at the chat here, guys, so I'll go back and have a look now. But I've been a little bit busy.
No problem. So, hey. See, look, we can do emojis now.
Oh, let's see, Deja Voodoo. Look, we've got to show or hide them. I think we could show that. That's interesting. Yes, Fruitcake Tony's managed to. Deja Voodoo's still alive. Yes, it's been banned for that. Deja Vu, blimey.
Yeah. So, guys, while Simon gives us a bit of his presentation on a couple of topics in relation to the album, if you guys have any questions in relation to what Brad presented, please put them in the chat, and vice versa. If you got anything for Simon's contribution, obviously throw them in the chat too. We'll try our best to get to them. If not on this show, certainly on the next show. Simon.
Yeah. Well, I thought I'd do a bit of my usual thing, which is what else was happening in 1966, and then a bit of possibly just a few sentences on a sort of cultural background, because there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in '66. I think that are the background.
Oh, okay. Is it the Rock Professor here? Oh, hold on then.
Oh, the Rock Professor. Hold on.
Okay, hold on.
Turn up.
Pay attention, class. It's the Rock Professor here with another look at the events surrounding this week's classic album.
All right.
Who is that bloke?
Who's that educated?
He's that nitwit. Yes.
Who's that educated?
Today's mandatory read, by the way, is 1966 by John Savage. Only 2 inches thick.
Only
yes,
2
folks.
inches.
Only 2 inches thick. Yeah. Careful with that, Mr. Walton. Careful with that axe, Eugene. So, I'll do it because I think there's a few things about that pertain, as I say, to the sort of cultural background of this record. So on March the 4th, the Beatles' John Lennon is quoted in the London Evening Standard as saying, "We're more popular than Jesus now," which he comes to regret. On March the 6th, there's 5,000 fans of the Beatles signed a petition urging British Prime Minister Harold Wilson to reopen the Cavern Club. It had been closed for some reason. The Byrds released their psychedelic single 8 Miles High, denying that it's a drug song. That's not the Eiffel Tower over there. Yes, right. And as I said just now, Pet Sounds was released in the US, and that really spurred. I think that was one of the spurs of the Beatles. They definitely, I've read in the sort of friendly competition, but Paul McCartney certainly heard it and up the game. Bob Dylan is on tour, and he's famously the famous Judas incident at the Manchester Free Trade Hall is in May, and I think that as you said earlier, Andrew, I think the Beatles performed at the Budokan in Tokyo as they're sort of winding down there, but they're still playing in '66. They're still doing some tours and some gigs. Obviously, Cream is formed, does its first official concert in Windsor. And then John Lennon, in August, has to hold a press conference in Chicago to apologise for his remarks, saying that they were more popular than Jesus, which is well done. As we talked about earlier, The Doors record their self-titled first album. And I think Timothy Leary forms a spiritual group, League for Spiritual Discovery, or LSD in the United States, because remember at this stage acid is still legal until October, when it is made illegal in the States and a controlled substance. In November, John Lennon meets Yoko Ono, and at the end of the year, 24th, the Beatles begin recording Sgt. Pepper's, so they're still on it as a thing. In a more broader context, I think that we should remember that I think every era has its the things that are the big issues of the day. And I think in '66, more than anything else, it was the year where people felt that they were about to be blown up by the bomb, the atom bomb. It's the CND, and it's taking off in a big way. And there was a film at the time which showed what happens if you dropped a bomb on a small town. It was really quite scary in those days, and I think that explosion of the teenage culture in the '60s is fueled by that. The fear of that, are we still going to be alive tomorrow? Makes you get on with today in a way that possibly other times you didn't so much. There's always a major concern. Today it's environment, global warming, terrorism, government surveillance, take your pick. Then it was the other thing is, of course, the Vietnam War, which in '66 more US citizens went to Vietnam than any other year. So at its peak in the in the '60s, it kind of I think at '66 as well, in the John Savage book, it makes a tremendous case for the Beatles retiring, from live gigs and not doing that and there seems to be a thing where they kind of got bored. Basically, Jagger gave an interview with a journalist called Maureen Cleave where he talks about being bored. He goes to nightclubs and it's he finds it an empty experience, and thinking there must be more to it. And bearing in mind they've only been going for like 4 years, 3 or 4 years, it's quite a step. But what it's doing is it is fueling the beginning of the counterculture and the idea that there must be more to it than just fame, girls and money. And I think that that's clearly fueling what the Beatles are doing on this album. You know, there's a lot of Eastern Indian influences and Eastern mysticism coming into this, and that's chiming with the times about where pop stars are these days, and what they're thinking about and what they're doing. I think I'd also say that in a way, I think that, I mean, you, Andrew, you earlier described Revolver as a rock and roll album. I describe Revolver as a rock album, and I think it's one of the earliest rock albums. You know, this is the start of the rock era as opposed to the rock and roll era. You know, I think the earlier Beatles stuff is rock and roll for sure, and they have their roots in that, and they keep their roots, absolutely keep their roots. But for me, this is where the rock album starts, and I think this is where rock starts, and I think that the Beatles are doing that. Dylan clearly is doing that. You know, the Dylan tour with the Hawks, with the band in '66 is definitely rock. It's not rock and roll. It's absolutely rock. Has his roots, and the Rolling Stones are definitely getting into rock, and you know, Satisfaction and things like that are rock songs. They're not rock and roll songs. They have roll, but and so I think that there's this kind of this sort of change going on in '66. '66 is the year where there's the height of the singles era. Basically, from '67 onwards, the album starts to come in. People start, taking the album more seriously, and by '71, the album is at its zenith and has overtaken singles in what sells. But it's the beginning of that crossover when the singles. So I think that clearly the major drug of the time is LSD, acid, which everyone, the Beatles take in '66. Lennon and Harrison and Ringo take it with in America with Jim and Gwyn, people from the Byrds, and McCartney takes it later. But by the time they've arrived at Revolver, they've all been taking LSD. And one of the things about being on tour is not being on tour is you're hanging around. So I think they were probably ingesting quite a lot of it. So I think all these influences are starting to come in to in '66, starting to be the main thing, the main drivers for rock music in general. It becomes rock music, and all these things are being delivered into the into their world. I think you can tell, as I said earlier, that that the fashions are still. Hey Brian, how you doing? The fashions are still kind of quite modish, jackets and Dylan's herringbone jackets and his polka dot stuff, but straight jeans and stuff. Just a point of interest. Did you know you couldn't buy black Levi 501s in 1966? You had to buy white ones and then dye them yourself by sitting in a bath of dye. So anyone with black jeans in 1966 has gone the extra mile. You can tell they're serious about it. Kind of thing. I think in music terms, again, you can see that things are starting to change. You're getting away from the sort of folky thing and getting more into rock, and that's carrying on in the background as well. But the other interesting thing to me is that whilst we talk about this is the beginning of the counterculture, drugs, and all those things, there's also a kind of parallel sort of straight pop thing which your parents would have liked still going on. The Engelbert Humperdinks of this world are still going. So you've got, I can remember this where you'd watch Top of the Pops or something, one of the very few programs that do music on, and you'd have to sit through 5 terrible records to get to the Byrds or the Who or the Rolling Stones or something, to get to the one record that really chimed with you and really liked it. So I think there's definitely that sort of teenage rebellion stuff going on, and it's coming to the fore as we move into the late '60s and flower power and the counterculture. So it's just So if you were to, I mean, clearly the LSD influence is very strong with the Beatles. We can tell that if we listen to Revolver. I think Revolver is an LSD album. I think you can say that without fear of contradiction. And I love the fact that Lennon they got to their initial things. They got to their coffee got spiked by their dentist who they'd gone to dinner with. Which I think is really funny, and he didn't really know what it was. He just sort of, it's just a middle class thing. I'll just put this in the coffee, see what happens, But I don't think it was my reading of it is not very clear about what was going on. But
they were angry about it.
Yeah. They went out. Yes, pissed off about it, which is quite funny. But so it's a bit of background for you and what's going on in the culturally at the time. I'll talk about. Andrew's asked me to talk a bit about the sort of Indian influences on this album, which are clear. I mean, I think George Harrison is playing the sitar on this record. I know he'd done it on Rubber Soul. So their first exposure to Indian music was on the making of Help, when they were shooting a scene in a restaurant when the guy gets thrown into the soup, and there were some Indian musicians playing in the background, and Harrison said he remembers picking up the sitar, trying to hold it and thinking, this is a funny sound. It was a kind of just an incidental thing, but somewhere down the line he also heard the name Ravi Shankar as well. And then he talked to David Crosby of the Byrds, and he mentioned the name as well. So he went and bought a Ravi Shankar record to see what it was about, and really liked it, as a sound and as a thing. And then he actually met a guy from the Asian music circle who said, "Oh, Ravi Shankar's going to come to my house for dinner. Do you want to come too?" So we did. So it's a kind of opportunist thing, just sort of happened to be, not a. He then decided that he started playing clearly the sitar on Rubber Soul on this Bird of Sloan, and he went and bought a sitar from a shop in Oxford Street called India Craft. I mean, it stocked carvings and incense and stuff like that. And I don't know if you guys had those shops around. We certainly had those shops around in the early 70s. Indian rugs and carvings and stuff. So, and he just took it away, and he said it actually wasn't very good. It's a pretty crummy quality one, but and then they were at the point where they started recording Norwegian Wood and needed something. You start looking in the cupboard to see what they could find, and there it was. Pick up the sitar, and he didn't really figure out. He just found the notes that could play the lick, and it fitted and worked. And isn't that just the great thing about the Beatles, And I think lots of other groups that we talked about, what will fit there. And there's no sort of, oh, look, we're a 4%. Whatever fits, that goes in, doesn't it? So it's the sitar, and we know that other bands were using sitars as well. They started to come in, and yeah, absolutely. Crappy does the great Peter Green. So and then clearly that kind of voyage with the sitar leads into later, and after this I think really that they go off with the Maharishi and get into transcendental meditation. I think the others didn't really carry on with it too much, but I think George did throughout his life. That was one of the mainstays of his life. So I think it all started with some Indian musicians in a restaurant in the background of Help, which is quite incidental. And
what's really interesting about how they got spiked by the dentist on the anthology DVDs. If you guys haven't seen it, buy them on DVDs. Get them and watch them, because these some great interviews. For some strange reason, that's not on YouTube, so they must have some strident copyright rules with that. But But what's really interesting about that whole experience, while everyone else was upset and freaking out, because they didn't know what was going, and I think Patty Boyd talks about it in her book too. She was driving the car, and they were driving really, really slowly. But George Harrison specifically remembers that that's where he found his Indian side, I think, his Indian essence, because he said that all he could remember was going to the mountain looking for the yogi. So Simon, the fact that you're mentioning the sitar and hearing that from his point of view, because Brian Jones was doing that same kind of thing, wasn't he? Mm. So there was something resonating deeper within George Harrison at a deeper level that the other Beatles kind of supported him in, didn't they? The fact that you mentioned that they buggered off to go and see the Maharishi, and Sexy Sadie
in North Wales, yes,
in Bangor, and
something of a clash of cultures there. I would have thought in 1966, North Wales.
But George carried on with that though, didn't he? And
he did. Yeah.
The other guys sort of. Doesn't Paul McCartney still practice TM? I think he does.
Does he? That's interesting. Yeah, I didn't realise he did.
Yeah, I think he still practices the TM technique. People in the chat might be able to confirm that. But how important do you think that Eastern philosophy? I think personally, it's what offers this album that otherworldliness that we hear, that Brad mentioned. Every time you listen to this album, there's something unfolding. And just imagine listening to Tomorrow Never Knows in 1966, Simon. Just imagine. Well,
it's funny you should say that. I've told this story before, but when they'd recorded it and not released it, do you remember I told this story where Chaz Hodges, who'd been playing with Dave Berry and played with Albert Lee and Chaz and Dave, he tells this story where he's in a dressing room and Paul McCartney says to him, "Do you want to hear our new record?" And he puts on Revolver and he said, "You have no idea the experience of sitting in a dressing room, playing for the first time ever, and with Paul McCartney, and then being asked what you think of it." And he said, "We get to Yellow Submarine," and he said, "Yellow Submarine." He said, and Paul McCartney's going, "What do you think?" And he's going, "I don't know what to think. It's a song about a submarine. What am I supposed to say?" which I think is the brilliance of that story. Is it just shows that yes, there we are. I say beautiful. The kind of the other one, the change that has happened. It isn't "I Want to Hold Your Hand," which is very easy to make a commentary on. What do you say? But I can't imagine the first time you ever heard Yellow Submarine in 1966, when you have not heard anything like that before. It's a completely bizarre subject matter of what are you talking about, and what. Okay, and yes, it's exactly that face, and you think, well, and he's saying, "I don't know what to think." It's Yellow Submarine, isn't it? Are we being raided again? But so I think that's I can understand, and I think that's kind of that. But I think it chimes with the time, doesn't it? The whole hippie movement there's very much that intertwined with the Eastern philosophy, the drugs, the opening of your mind, the mysticism. It's all about personal growth and about the tuning into the universe and other such hippie things as that. And this album is in the forefront of that and absolutely mirrors that in so many ways. That's one of the things that is brilliant about it. Only one of the things, but that it is absolutely, and it's kind of, but it's in the front end of it, isn't it? 66 is the front end of that, and it's already reflecting that.
I'm glad you mentioned Yellow Submarine, because I'm around a certain age, you know. You know,
you're a youngster. Face facts. You're a youngster.
Yeah. You know, I know I look like I'm 29, but yeah. I'm a bit older than that.
you and Johnny Bean, only 29. Yes.
but we were singing Yellow Submarine, Simon and Brad, at school, at primary school, at school assembly. Yellow Submarine was, I didn't know it was a Beatles song. You know, I remember singing it, you know, when I was 5, 6 or 7. And then, you know, a few years later, oh my God, it's a Beatles song. You know, I thought it was, you know, this old man, he plays one, you know, didn't realize it was Beatles song.
Careful with that.
Yeah, I know. Getting into trouble now.
Slightly. In retrospect, you see, you think to yourself, this old man. Anyway, it's, you know, slightly more sinister than I first thought.
Yes.
Just saying, just putting it out there, you know, changing times.
It had everything to do with knick knack paddywhack, give the dog a bone. This old man, you know, it had everything to do with just the tonal variations, no meanings to the words. It was just, you know, rock and roll.
Yes, it is. But you're right. There is a sort of childlike quality to Yellow Submarine, isn't there? There absolutely is. You know, that sort of, you know, we all live in a Yellow Submarine. It's like, what worse thing, you know, kids singing that in the playground? Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry,
we used to sing Yellow Submarine at primary school when I was a wee tacker.
Yeah. Did you know it was a Beatles song then?
Did I know back then? Not necessarily. Yeah. No. Not necessarily. I didn't really know. But, you know, at the time, obviously, I was very young. So, you know, didn't really know I'd seen pictures of the Beatles, but I never really understood it back then. No.
Look at that. See, Jazz Thunder 50. See, very progressive. Young female primary school teacher playing Yellow Submarine. And Mr. Tambourine Man.
Jazz Thunder 50, where are you?
Yeah. Welcome, Jazz Thunder 50. New name. Welcome indeed.
It'll be interesting to see what part of the world you were in 1966 singing that.
Yeah. But yes, I think that's the interesting part is that in a sense they would do Yellow Submarine and then they would do Tomorrow Never Knows, and that's how it works in the Beatles world. You know, something for Ringo to sing. Why is it Octopus's Garden? Isn't it? Wait a minute, is underwater a theme on this? Octopus's Garden, Yellow Submarine. It's all underwater. Ringo only sings about underwater songs. Just a theory.
England, but it's in Scotland.
Scotland.
Awesome.
Jazz Thunder. Yeah, me too. Oh, well, I'm in England. Jazz Thunder 50, so down near Bristol.
Okay, you English guys, I'm picking England to win the World Cup. I'm picking England to win the World Cup. The
European Championships.
Yeah. I watched them the other morning play the Germans. Fantastic. Oh, watched them this morning play Ukraine. Sorry.
Yeah. Well done. Watching us crush the Ukraine under the heel of oppression. No.
No, I love football.
Yeah, it was a good match as well. It's a good match. Yeah. So we'll see next. We'll see the Danes. We have history with the Danes. They come over here. 670. Okay. Shall we talk a little bit about the cover?
Yeah. I haven't done a lot of research on that. So
here we are. The cover. Amazing cover by, of course, Klaus Voormann, later bass player with John Lennon.
I'll just throw up a couple
of graphs. Have you got? Oh, there we are. Oh, beautiful! Look at that. Some.
So that's his
sketch,
Simon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. apparently, look at that.
And this here apparently that's apparently what it was going to look like.
Far out.
But that's much better, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah. It's apparently it's he just during the session to Revolver, Lennon asked him, said, "Got any ideas for the cover?" And apparently Vorman was like, "Wow, I could do a cover for one of the most famous bands in the world." You know, he decided that what he was going to do, that his aim was to reflect the radical departure in sound represented particularly by Tomorrow Never Knows, and his choice of a black and white cover was in deliberate defiance of the preferred vivid colour stuff that was going on at the time. And when he submitted his work to the Beatles, apparently Brian Epstein cried, overjoyed that Vaughan had managed to capture the experimental tone of the Beatles' new music. And yeah, an amazing sort of pen and ink drawing, as a graphic drawing. I think, yes. So they invited him, and he did that. In fact, he did four different things, and he took him about 3 weeks to do. Doing clearly the line drawings of the Beatles, and then combining the drawings with the collage of the photographs and stuff, and organising them. But he said it in choosing work in black and white. He wanted to not only to shock, but he wanted the work to stand out in a muddle of colour, which is quite interesting, isn't it? So soon, in a sense, we think of the world turning Technicolor in those days, and yet Klaus Voormann, that album, the album we're talking about, has a black and white cover, completely, and absolutely stands out, completely, like as being kind of its time, but not harking back as well. So,
back as well.
Oh, that's the sound of my own voice coming back at me. It's frightening. So, so he, so that's the cover. I think apparently he got paid £50, which is
Not
decent money in 1966, but not for the possibly not for the amount. It's like one of those things, isn't it, that you design a cover and it's just one thing you design and it takes you a couple of weeks' work and you get 50 quid for it, but you don't, the resonance of it and people seeing it and the number of albums that it sells is just not hi Aaron, how you doing? It's not reflected in the fee given to. It's the same as the session musicians who play, isn't it? You go in and play on it, and that's just a session fee. You get 20 quid a session fee or something. Then it becomes massively famous, and you're all over the place for playing that. Yes. So that's a brief overview of the sleeve. It's a fantastic sleeve, as I say, really stands out. There we are with the collage of the people. And where is it? Up here, the wrong side time. This one. See, Bob, I think it's Klaus Voormann's signature. There. I'm getting a bit closer. Not that way, so he signed it, and I think it is enormously representative, isn't it? And I love the fact that there's kind of people coming out of the ears, particularly, given that this is an oral experience.
It's the first Beatles album that didn't have the Beatles on the cover.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you call it? Photographed.
Yeah, photographed on the cover. Yeah. I mean, fantastic back covers are. Look how cool, as you said, Andrew. Look how cool they look. And in that transition period, aren't they? They're not quite. See, Ringo's still wearing a suit, previous, and still got. Whereas the others are starting to wear. Lennon's got a different shirt on, but still a shirt, still relatively short hair, and not the kind of longer hair, moustaches and stuff that came in, for Sgt. Pepper's the next year. So transition period. See, Harrison's still got a jacket on and a shirt.
Just another still from the from that
that's
same,
better. Nice colour photograph. Yeah. So it's a fascinating, really. You know. Also, do not think, Andrew, it's the black and white version of Cream's Disraeli Gears, isn't it? Martin Sharp's, isn't it? It's that similar thing, kind of a similar kind of graphic thing. I don't know whether either of them were influenced by the other particularly. Not seeing about, but it did strike me that there was a similarity in that kind of graphic style, with collages and various things like that. Clearly, must be the thing of the art thing of the 60s. Yeah, Brian. Yes, it does. There is a Terry Gilliam's influence by those 60s things. That's when he would have been in his teens, I guess. Terry Gilliam and stuff. So, as I say, fantastic cover. Really speaks, really represents the album in a fantastic way. Massively strong image. What more could you ask of a record sleeve, really, than that? I feel.
Oh, that album cover and Abbey Road, just phenomenal album covers, rock and roll album covers. Look, I'll make it pretty clear here, guys. I'm Sgt. Pepper's is, it's a record cover for me. I don't see Sgt. Pepper's as a better album cover than the one that you just held up, Simon. My preference is Revolver. I think that album cover is amazing. It's stunning. The way that the eyes spookily,
don't tell me they're following you around the room.
Yeah. Because they are actual eyes, that they've photographed in where the eyes are. So they aren't, the eyes aren't drawn. So it gives it that depth that,
you know what that is, don't you? It's a Peter Cook and Dudley Moore sketch, isn't it? The Botticellis, they're following, the eyes are following me around the room.
But,
what album cover I've always liked is Rubber Soul. I've always liked that album cover. I don't know why. It's a cool cover. It's a cool cover.
Yeah. It's again, it's the beginning of that transition period, isn't it? It's slightly more psychedelic, slightly in tune with their dope smoking exploits and things that I think is just get that feeling, don't you, that it's moving in a different direction. There's a different vibe going on to what they've done before.
I think your presentation is fantastic, Simon. I think the album cover is phenomenal. I've got a couple of T-shirts with it. I love it. I just can't.
It does everything an album cover should do, shouldn't it? It's a massively strong image. And as Foreman says, it stands out in a sea of colour. Whatever you're doing, you put that, it's going to stand out. And as a piece of advertising, which what an album cover is after all, is to attract people, and as a visual representation of what that album sounds like, I think it's a it does everything it's supposed to. It fulfills the brief, I think, as they say in advertising circles. What do you want, John?
Yeah. One of the
okay, Interloper.
Okay. What I specifically like about that album, and the great thing about getting this information years later, the books and getting hold of the DVDs and watching the anthology series, I love the backstory on this album. I love the fact that Paul McCartney was the man about on town. He was going to all the bookstores. He was going to all the nightclubs. He was Mr. Cool. John Lennon, he was home. He was living a life, a married life with, his family, but inwardly exploring. And then you had George Harrison, who was just doing his own little strange little thing, but he was the glue. He was the glue between the two guys. I'm convinced of it. So much so that they acknowledged that by giving him the opening track. you know, on this album. So this album for me, Simon and Brad, is a collaborative one that none of the other albums up until that time had. And it reinforces with me anyway. Even Ringo, you know, when you consider Ringo's involvement, he's always had a place to play in these albums, hasn't he? But his role is significant on this album as well as just his drumming. You know, his vocals have increased to another level, and we can talk about that when we talk about the songs. But this
great.
What do they say? It's a sum of the parts.
Hey, Thomas Santiago, how you doing? Welcome. Greg Vanzini said, and clearly he was around at the time, it shocked us as well. We stared and stared at it, sort of knowing we had entered some sort of different new age. Well, I think that's a really good way of putting it. As a, you know, that absolutely, that's exactly what it's doing. You know, as a piece of art. You know, and I think that's what's brilliant these days. You know, it is. You know, Klaus Voormann would have viewed it as a piece of art. Something, you know, that has an artistic vision and a depth, and you know, which I think, you know, all of those things, you know, in the 60s, that's what it was about, wasn't it? You know, I'm an artist. I'm not just a itinerant musician. I'm an artist. This is art, and I think it's, you know, that change in the perspective from being, you know, a pop musician to being a rock musician, where, you know, it's serious. This is serious art, what I'm doing, and you know, and to be taken seriously. And you know, the wrappings of that in the album cover reflect that seriousness. Which
you're right, Jazz Thunder.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right, Jazz Thunder. When Oasis came out in the early 1990s, mid 1990s. Because I was a Beatles nut, as soon as I saw, you know, Oasis with their first album. But what really pleased me about Oasis is that they didn't hide the fact that they were Beatles nuts. They said very clearly that they were inspired by the Beatles. So, you know, give credit where credit's due.
But yeah, I mean, I think, you know, if you think in '63 they did Please Please Me and With the Beatles, which are, you know, in '64 they did Hard Day's Night, made a film, and Beatles for Sale. In '65 they did Help, another film, and Rubber Soul, and there's quite a lot of difference between Help and Rubber Soul. Yeah, it's like 2 albums a year, plus a film, plus tours. I mean, no wonder they wanted to stop when it got to '66. You know, you'd be knackered then, wouldn't you? I
don't know where Brad's gone, but that's a good point. That's one of the notes that I made here, because the first part of the year they had 3 months off, and that was supposed to be for the third film, which never eventuated. So they had some time, you know, to actually do something individually, to go out there and do all the stuff, come back together, Simon, and we've got an album, I think, that reflects the time off that they had.
Absolutely. Well, it's time when you're not being driven by the record company, not being driven by the, you know, the next touring itinerary and those sorts of things. So it's time to, you know, you can sit down. And I think, going back, Andrew, to what a point you made earlier on, interesting, that the general accepted view is that Lennon is the avant-garde one, isn't there? When actually McCartney was doing the you know, was actually doing the avant-garde stuff. He was out in London, interested in the avant-garde, every bit as much as Lennon was, and interested in that stuff every bit as much as Lennon. But I think possibly with less credit to, you know, given to him for that, and people think of him as the straight man, and I don't think that's necessarily true.
One other point too, guys, I'd like to talk with you, and you mentioned it. So obviously 66 is important because of, you know, what happened with the Maureen Cleve article that you mentioned. But what I really like about the Beatles, if you go back and have a look, and those interviews are on YouTube, and I did that in preparation for this show. Go and have a look at those interviews, and you can see very clearly that John Lennon's, you know, obviously trying to dig himself out of a hole, but the rest of the band stick up for John. You see that, you know, they're all sticking up for him. They're saying, well, he just said something, you know, that was taken out of context. And I love that. I love it when a band is united and they're sitting there and they're obviously sticking up for him. It's great. It's great to see. Apparently after, you know, when it happened, they had a couple of conversations and said, oh man, you know, no one in England did anything about it, you know, and 6 months later it gets tacked on to something.
Yeah, that's the interesting bit, isn't it? That nobody takes any notice of it to start with, you know, and then somebody picks up on it, and a few months later on it. It's an American radio station, I think, you know, and all of a sudden it becomes a big thing. And it only, you know, he makes this remark in March, beginning of March, and then only in August does he hold a press conference in Chicago to apologise. Like 5 months later, you know, it's like not 5 seconds later as it would be now, wouldn't it? You know, if you said something, I think I love this. I suppose if I had said television was more popular than Jesus, I would have gotten away with it. I'm sorry, I opened my mouth.
Yeah, and so what's really interesting though, Simon, is I read that interview years ago, you know, before I saw the actuals, and then you actually see him. He's, you know, you can see that he's quite angry. John Lennon's quite, you know, he's pissed off that he's having to defend something that he said, but he didn't
6 months
say.
ago, yes.
But he didn't say.
No.
All he was saying is that I find it remarkable that we're more popular than Jesus Christ. What's going on?
Yeah. Which is not quite the same as saying we're more popular than Jesus, isn't it? You know, declaiming it. Yeah. Oh no, completely. I absolutely, yes, that is, yeah. Well, it's the classic out of context thing, isn't it? You know, and the fact that the others stuck up for him because they understood the context of it.
1966, though, you know, as much as it was avant-garde, as much as LSD was still legal, and pot and all that, you know, it was still, you know, 1966.
1966. Do you remember
fascinating.
Back in 1966? Yeah.
That was a fascinating intro to the album. Brad, you've been quiet for a while. Is there anything?
I've been listening. Don't forget, I spoke for an hour straight. So, you know.
Here we go.
He had his chance.
I had my airtime. 1 hour. That's enough, isn't it?
Not enough.
Is there anything, Brad, that you want to say in conclusion to the present? Excuse me, for the presentation episode that you may have missed, or you want to recap? Because I think we've done a pretty good job. I think we've given a good balanced bit of history there, guys.
Yeah, look, for me, the album is such. Like I said at the very start, and I won't repeat myself too much, is like you can clearly hear each person individually's songwriting ability on this album. It's very highlighted on this record. Being a bit of a George Harrison nut, you know, it's great to hear his contribution with the 3 songs, and you can really hear each band member, you know, have evolved from that "Please Please Me" and "I Want to Hold Your Hand" era, if that makes sense. You know, and really only over a few years they evolved to that. So we're going to rank the tracks next week, and we want you guys to contribute in the chat with the rankings. So your homework for this week is to listen to this album, and we want you guys to give your little rankings in the chat, and anything that we miss or anything that you think that should be included in what we're talking about, throw in the chat. That'd be awesome.
Yeah. And we'll throw up some pics because you guys like that, and we really, really appreciate the kind comments that you guys have been giving us. So we'll throw up some pics of the instruments in relation to the tracks when we're talking about it and giving some input, and hashtag never a skip. Never a skip on.
10 out
There's
of
no
10,
skips on this. There's no skips on this album.
None. It's a great album, and go and listen to it a couple of times, because you'll find that each time you listen to it, you listen to it and you hear something slightly different every time in the songs, especially if you focus on, now that we've alluded you guys to some of the techniques they've used, the backtracking, all sorts of things.
Go and listen to it on some headphones if you can.
Yeah. You'll hear, like, listen to Tomorrow Never Knows, listen to it. I listen to this stuff usually while I put it on, and I listen to it pretty much in the dark or in a really, really dim lit room, and I just listen to the music, and you really pick up a lot more than when you've got distractions in the room,
Oh, absolutely. It's put on headphones, turn the lights down, listen to it from beginning to end without distractions, and you'll get a tremendous amount out of it.
And I love I love the era. The era of music that they were releasing in the 60s was, they were always about pack as much goodness into the song in 3 minutes or under. So there's one or two tracks on the record that go over 3 minutes, like a 3-minute one or 3 minute. I can't remember exactly what the minute count is, but like, I could listen to 10 minutes of Tomorrow Never Knows. There's so much goodness in it.
3 minutes. Tomorrow Never Knows is 3 minutes.
I know, it's like, it really needs to go longer, but it's phenomenal for what it is. So also take that into account when you're listening to the record. Is, if it was Led Zeppelin, they would have done like a 10-minute version of Tomorrow Never Knows. So yeah, it's phenomenal. Oh, we lost Simon, but the era as such, yeah.
There's one little thing that I want to mention before we go. I'll just wait for Simon to come back, bro. Just hold on. I'm looking forward to ranking the tracks with you guys next week, because look, it's clear that there's going to be a lot of Brad scores on this album. We're not going to apologize for that. There's going to be some, epic scores, and it's well deserved. And it'll be interesting to see what you guys think. I might, I look, I don't want to give away too much, but
no, don't give away. Don't give away.
Simon coming back. There's something I want to share with you guys. If you guys ever watched Mad Men, it's a fantastic series. And there's an episode in there where Don Draper, who's a notorious womanizer and a drinker, and anyway, he's chasing a piece of skirt, and the skirt gives him a copy of this album, Revolver, and she says to him, go and listen to the last song on the album or something like that, because he's trying to hang out with these young cats, and he puts it on, and the show ends with him listening to that song, and he just doesn't get it. It's a wonderful piece of filmmaking, in my opinion, because it just captures that generational gap in 1966 between the teenagers, the late teens, and someone in their late 30s, early 40s.
Yep. Hey, what I might do, because we're going to be going over these tracks in detail and explaining the reverse guitar solos and things like that, would you like me to explain how Harrison actually would construct his solo so when it's backwards it makes sense? Would you like me to explain that a little bit more in detail?
I think you should give that give one example of that. I think that would be fantastic for rock and roll posterity, for the credentials that we have as a British Electric Blues show. If you could do that, run through that, we can give you 5 minutes to do that. I think that will be important, and people can see exactly what they here. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, even if you're worried about getting flagged, I've got like I could maybe highlight my Pro Tools session of one of my songs and just isolate the guitar solo, how I recorded it, and then how I reversed it to see the continuity of where the note starts and where it ends, as opposed to it ends and starts. You know what I mean? So
yeah, mate, I think we should do that. That would be fantastic. And everyone is saying yes. Sonia's saying hell yes. Brian is saying yes. Yeah. Mate, if you could do that, that would be fantastic.
Yeah. All right.
Deja Voodoo is saying something really interesting too. The cultural transitioning from the 50s. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, look, it's one of those things where it's the techniques that were used on this record, innovative, they're revolutionary. They started things that people weren't doing. So here it is.
Sorry about that, guys. Got hurled off, and I don't know why. It keeps closing down all of a sudden. Just the whole thing goes. It's weird.
It's all right. Anyway, so looking forward to next week.
Awesome. That's great. We'll so Brad's going to give us a 5-minute synopsis, an example of how Harrison constructed his guitar solos, how he played them and then reversed them and then played them back again. So we can get that. So our channel will be spoilt to have that.
Let me see how I go with all that. And, if I can't get it together by next one, we will do a little highlight of it. But I should be right for next week.
Mate, if you can't do it next week, we can do a special. That's fine. So I don't want this to get in the way of us doing the special. So we can always jump on, guys, can't we, and just do a special. So that's no problem. That's no problem.
Be nice to do it in, with the album, but
yeah.
Okay. But, awesome. Thanks for letting me do the little intro on this album, and it's always a pleasure to listen to the contribution from you guys as well. And thanks for holding me up there, guys, and keep getting me through it.
No, we appreciate it, and that's one of the great things that our channel does. We all take turns. We all have opportunities to present what we think are key things. The fact that Simon mentioned the relationship between the Pet Sounds album is again interesting and critical to this album, and also the drug experience. We got to put that into context, don't we? It's the Beatles speak about it all the time. So
yeah.
I mean, we're in common with lots of other bands.
Relevant to the era, isn't it? It's relevant to the era. So.
But they weren't smashed though. They weren't like, it's not as if they were like just zoned out, 7 days a week. It
was experimental.
Six.
Yeah. Lennon was though. Lennon was for a while. For about 6 months.
Eight days a week.
Yeah. Well, Lennon was taking it every day for a long time.
He said, didn't he, that basically the LSD, he said it kind of smashed his ego, and he kind of, dismantled his ego, and he didn't really, for a bit, he didn't really care, and he just let them get on with what they, the rest of the Beatles were doing without really caring about it, which I thought was really interesting comment, that he made about it, kind of thing about that experience.
Gave room for George. Him and George had a thing going, and and the good thing about John Lennon is that he kind of knew. I think he knew that if he did this, and if George stepped up, it was going to be good for him. It's what you do for a mate, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think they encouraged George as he went on to, and as I've alluded to when we did Abbey Road, I think George became one of the primary songwriters and wrote the amazing songs on that album. Really, for me anyway. On Abbey Road, the George contributions on Abbey Road are my favourites.
Yeah.
And yes, guys, we are going to do All Things Must Pass. So yeah, we will be doing that. So we're in the stages of planning how we're going to do that, because that's a triple album. Yeah, there it is. There, it's a triple album. I don't. Yeah, Well, my co-hosts and I will discuss but we definitely have to do a couple of shows on that.
Yeah, I think that.
Are you buying the deluxe version, which was it $990 or something?
No, because
that's quite a lot, isn't it?
We had a quick discussion about this, thinking that the
liner notes aren't worth it.
Yeah, they're not
accurate.
Not going to be accurate enough for us. So
no, Spotify, baby.
Yeah, but I mean, look, at the end of the day, I'm looking forward to hearing all the extra stuff on the deluxe 50th anniversary or whatever it is. Yeah.
We'll definitely do a show. Got to do a show, because the three co-hosts here on this show have said that it's the best solo Beatles album. And if we can't bloody do this album, well, we must just pull the bloody pin and give up.
Now we've got to prove it's the best solo Beatles album.
Yes.
Well,
we're going to walk the talk now, Simon.
Yeah, we've talked the talk. Now I'm going to walk the walk.
It was an epic statement from George Harrison, wasn't it? That album when it came out.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
The Beatles album that never was written. You know, it's the Beatles album that never got written.
Look, don't get me wrong, guys. Look, I know that we're supposed to be talking about Revolver, but it's all related. Don't get me wrong. I love Wings Across America, and I love Band on the Run. Don't get me wrong. Great albums. Yeah, and some of the single songs that McCartney has done, like Coming Up and Mulligan Toe, great songs. But this album, All Things Must Pass. Yeah. Epic
album.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Triple album. That's gonna take us several weeks, isn't it?
I think we're gonna have to allow maybe 3 to 4 programs for that one, guys, and to stop having like a longer than a 2-hour show. I think we're gonna have to do it in probably 3 shows, maybe.
Yeah, well, we'll have a discussion, mate. How we do this. Maybe we might just pick some songs each to talk about, as opposed to go through and we can, I'm open up.
There's plenty of ways of cutting it. Plenty of ways.
Yeah.
Well, we can do one CD and then we can do another CD, can't we? So it comes down to it. There's plenty of ways of cutting it. It's fine.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good. Yeah. 1, 2, and 3. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a triple album. Let's do an album a week. That's how it works. Yeah.
Okay. Are we out of here?
We are.
That's it. Okay. Yes, indeed. Shall I say goodbye to the team, people in the chat? Yeah. So thanks to Deja Voodoo, Crappy Luxury, Mark Tanner, Johnny Heartbreaker, the Pride of Gothenburg. Pride of Gothenburg. Hello, how are you? Teresa, Maria de Souza. Thank you, Teresa, for your support, as always. Great Vanzini. Nice to see you, Great Vanzini. Hope you're good. Brian Spalding. Brian plays backwards, so he's familiar with playing. Sonia, of course, Sonia. Nelson Rodriguez, always here. And always tremendous comments from Nelson as well. Make me laugh, Nelson. Your way with words is excellent. Hobo Rody as well. And we had Jazz Thunder 50. Thanks for joining, Jazz Thunder 50. Crappy Luxury. Going back. Thomas Santiago as well. Aaron Lally. Aaron, thanks for joining. We had Johnny Bean, didn't we? And John ZD351. I don't know if that means something. It's Mark Tanner. And we had Johnny Bean and Co jumping earlier on. So thanks very much all for joining. Hope you enjoyed it. And we'll see you next week for Ranking the Tracks. Yeah, cool.
before we go, we want to do. Obviously, he's not in the chat, so we've always got to do a special shout out to our friend and good mate to the show, Warren. So, Warren, we know that you watch the show. So because you're not here, we're always thinking about you, and whatever's happening, you're okay, brother.
Yeah.
Keep well.
Yep.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. Warren, we dedicate the show to you, buddy. So hopefully you're okay.
Yes.
Happy birthday, America.
Sonia. Well done, Sonia. Yes, we should say that. Happy 4th of July on Monday. Have a lovely long weekend.
Is Brad going to play the Star Spangled Banner?
No.
In a Hendrix style. I'd
have to smash the guitar afterwards. So no.
Oh God. Yeah.
Stay safe, everybody.
That's a difficult one. Take care all. Take care all in the chat. Have a safe week. And we'll see you next week. Bye.
Where are we? Where are we? Hold on. There we are.
There's the stop button.